are the most important people in your life and how do you grow that circle? Our guest today is Florence Ann Romano, and she is a personal growth strategist, a philanthropist, and the author of Build Your Village, a guide to finding joy in community in every stage of life. And she is passionate about providing people with strategies to connect again and to end this loneliness epidemic. And we're just excited to have her here today. Florence Ann, welcome to Leaders Transformation.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Nicole. I'm thrilled to be here and chat with you.
My pleasure. And before we dive in, I do want to do a shout out to Angela at Steve Allen Media. She has been patiently waiting, following up with me, making sure that we got this scheduled and that just making sure that I have all the information I need. So thank you, Angela, for you. And we just this is what makes this show a success, is having amazing guests to have conversations with.
Well, I appreciate you giving Angela the shout out because she is always behind the scenes doing everything. And honestly, today is the perfect time to be shouting out because we had someone earlier, not to get into it, was kind of blaming that she didn't do something. And I was like, no, she never misses a beat. And so the fact that you said that just completely makes me happy because she was absolutely and always is like right on the money.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Totally on the ball. So, yes. So, let's talk about this village that you talk about. What is this village that we are to build and how do we create this?
Gosh, that age old proverb of it takes a village to raise a child. Everybody seems to say that phrase, throw it around, and it's great. I love that proverb. But I always think about, okay, let's cut that in half. It takes a village. Well, that's probably more accurate. It takes a village in so many ways in our lives because all of us have some sort of community, whether or not we have children. And then it begs the question, don't you deserve to find your people and have a community, even if you don't have children? And I feel like that proverb, as wonderful as it is to apply to childcare, really needs to be applied to everyone because we all need to find our support. And no matter what socioeconomic environments we're born into, things like that, it still should not exempt you from being able to find the people to support you, to be able to find what nourishes you, what waters you, what helps you grow. And I feel like after COVID, people are having such a hard time reconnecting. And that's really what brought me to really sit with it and think, well, what can we do to actually solve this friendship recession, this loneliness epidemic that we're going through? And I decided I wanted to write a book that really answered the question, where is the village and how do we get there?
So for you, I mean, obviously there's a story behind this story. And so maybe give us a little bit of background of how you got to that point where you said, hey, you know what, I think this is really important enough that I'm going to write a book on it and I'm going to
Well,
make it my focus.
it all started in 1985. No, I'm kidding. I did when I was born. I really started my kind of this personal growth journey as a childcare provider. So you'll see it kind of became very full circle for me. I was a nanny for 15 years and I took care of a lot of different kids, a lot of different families. And I was very lucky then to be able to be a voice for childcare in the new millennium in a lot of ways. And because of my experience being in so many homes, working with so many families, working with so many children, and seeing those dynamics of connection and support, it really led me to writing a children's book and then being able to be an advocate for families in a different way after writing the book. And then COVID hit, and everyone's villages, everyone's communities, all were ripped away from them. And for the first time, Nicole, I kind of stopped and thought, geez, on a global level, we all know what it's like to lose our support systems. And how often do you go through something on a global level that everyone can understand? And as COVID, we learned more and more about it. We saw that 2 weeks to slow the spread, it turned into years. And and everyone kind of retreated. Everyone went into that hibernation. And once we were able to come back out of that and kind of claw our way out of that tortoise shell, I noticed that people were having a very hard time being able to connect again. But beyond just that, not really knowing how to connect again, they didn't really want to connect again. And that to me was fascinating, that after all that time, wouldn't you think you would be hungry for it, starving for it? But instead, people were afraid of it and almost resentful of having to kind of learn how to walk all over again in that way. A skill I don't think any of us thought would disappear from that. But it did. And so I wanted to write a book that answered that question, where is the village, that we hear people bemoan all the time, but also create a book that made it seem doable and accessible. And I'm a visual learner, which I think a lot of people are. And in my mind, I think, okay, connection and building community and all of that is based in kind of casting the role of in a movie or in a play. And I want to think about that in our own lives. How are we casting the main characters in our lives? So I created 6 archetypes that you identify with. Who are these people? Who are these 6 that I need to get to know and know how they exist currently in my village or they're missing in my village? And then also, who am I of these 6 people? And how am I showing up as these 6 people in other people's villages? Because this work cannot be selfish. It has to be reciprocal, and it has to be us, making sure that we're showing up for other people, taking care of other people. That's how community works.
You're thinking, or I want to go into the 6 archetypes shortly here, but before we do that, you mentioned something very interesting, is that people didn't want to connect. And I think about, you were a nanny, so this analogy with kids is that when they get really tired and they're cranky and they need a nap, but they don't want to go for a nap, but that's the very thing they need, is the nap. And I feel like a lot of us were feeling like that, like, no, I don't want to do it. And that's absolutely what we need. And we tend to isolate. I know for myself, like, I'll isolate.
Yeah.
And that's the very time that I shouldn't isolate, is when I feel the need to isolate, or the inclination to that. How do you get people out of that before we can even talk about who is in their life? We got to get the mindset around, I actually want to do this.
Want to do it. And, I love that quote that says, if you want something that's never happened before, then you're probably going to have to do something you've never done before. And I feel like that's this work for some people, even though you maybe have experience making friends in all sorts of different ways in your life, there's kind of a rebirth after COVID for all of us, that we do kind of have to learn to walk again and talk again, kind of like a newborn baby, kind of just screaming about it. You don't know exactly what you want or you need, but you're uncomfortable and that it's not okay, but I don't know how necessarily to solve that. And so identifying the fact that you want it to change is important, because, Nicole, there are plenty of people that I talk to where I talk about doing this work and putting yourself out there. And, we'll talk about the different steps and the different tools. But you can kind of see the color drain from their face as soon as you're talking about it, because it's going to take effort. It's going to take time. It's going to take honesty and vulnerability. And not everybody's ready to do that. Bless you. And not everybody's ready to do that. And I think just the sheer fact that, whoever's listening to this is thinking maybe about taking this step in their life, that's enormous. And I want to make it digestible for you. I want to make it feel like it's not this enormous lift. Because oftentimes it's the small bites that we take, it's the small steps that we take that lead to these big results. And so that's the work of doing this, is understanding that it absolutely is accessible to you. But before we can even start, you have to want it. I can't make you want it.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's talk about these 6 archetypes.
So the six I feel are, now let me give you the caveat here with that. I talk about these six and then people are like, well, are these the only six and there's no one else and everyone has to fit into these six people? And of course, I'm not saying that, there can't be another archetype created to fit the mold of something. But I think these are broad enough, but also specific enough, as much of an oxymoron as that might be. It gives room for you to figure out kind of how to define it for yourself, but then also gives you some structure to help you start searching and start doing that inner search and that outward search. So I'm going to go through them quickly, but there's a reason why I'm going to. So accepting, dependable, communicator, cheerleader, organizer, and healer. Now, the reason why I kind of just, blow through those kind of quickly is I always love to watch, and I get to watch your beautiful face, Nicole, as I say them, because most of the time I can start to see people think about the own people in their lives and start to cast automatically who they think those people are. And that's the beauty of this, is it should feel that way, where you look at your own kind of personal ecosystem and you go, okay, without her giving me a definition, I probably know who my accepting person is, or my healer is, or the organizer. And yeah, we can get into the specificities of that, and the book certainly gets into, really, stretching that out. So you can kind of plug in so many different places in your life and, kind of create, again, this personal ecosystem for yourself. But I want to give you an illustration of that. So for example, the healer. The healer is the person that is going to walk through whatever it is that you're going through in life, whatever the it is, they're going to walk next to you through it. And they're not there to fix you. They're not there to fix the situation necessarily. They're just there to be next to you through it. And again, make you feel better. That's, regardless of what you're going through, you feel like you have this North Star, this guiding light. That's the healer. Now, the healer is not necessarily going to be really great at being the communicator. The communicator is someone you feel you can delegate to. They're going to get what you need done. Okay, that's great. That's a doer. You may not go to that person with, your feelings and feel that they're going to do a great job of taking care of those things. And here's the great news. That's why you should have more than one friend in life. You should not be putting all your hopes and dreams and everything you need on one person. My gosh, how horrible that would be for that person to think they have to deliver all of that to you whenever you need it. And also very difficult for you to think that you're going to get everything you need from one person. So having friends that have different skill sets, that's wonderful. That's what you're looking for these six, to bring those skills to the table so it can be divided up. And then also looking and thinking, of those six people, what do I possess? And not only that, the cool thing is too, you're going to be those six in different ways to different people. You may be the organizer and the healer to one friend, and maybe the accepting and the cheerleader to another. And that's a really cool thing to figure out about your personality too. Gosh, I didn't know I could be, all these people, but different villagers to different people. Gosh, I didn't know I had that depth within me, or that skill set. So there's a lot of really fun work to be done here too, about figuring out who you are, who you need in your life, and how you show up for other people.
Well, I love that. And I love the fact that it's not a limiter, but it does make it more intentional about understanding ourselves. I love, anything that can help us to understand ourselves better, understand others better, how we relate better, and to even think about, yourself as being, a lot of us, I think we think about ourselves in terms of vocations. You ask somebody, tell me about yourself. And they're like, I do this, and I'm, the mom, I'm the sister, I'm the this, I'm the that, but those are like titles.
Right. The resume.
Yes.
Yeah.
Versus saying, I'm an encourager, right? Or more and more people are saying I'm a healer, but am I the acceptor? Most people won't say that or see them even themselves as that. Or maybe I'm not the acceptor, and maybe I could use a little bit of work in there to be more accepting of people. And so I love the fact that even though, as you described, you listed out each of the descriptive words, and they kind of sound general, but there's, like you said, very specific qualities and attributes to each one of those. And I think that's really important for us to see who we are and then see who the people are in our lives. Now, how do you ensure that as you're building this village, that you have the right people in the right seats
I love
at
that
the right
question.
time?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, I love that question because this is an evolution. This does ebb and flow. And sometimes, when you're looking, you're doing this evaluation of the people who are currently in your life, and you're going to start casting them, in this way. You start thinking, okay, I think so and so is my accepting. I think so and so is my cheerleader, and then you start to do the work, and you go, something's not sitting just right here. This person is not falling in the definition of this. And also, it's probably bringing a lot to the surface that you've been probably witnessing or experiencing with them, but maybe not giving a whole lot of attention to. For example, maybe, that person calls you on your phone, you see the name pop up or the text message, and you're like, oh no, I've got to deal with this person now. And it's another drama. It's another this. Okay, well, you know what? That's a signal. It's kind of a red flag that maybe that person and you need to have a discussion, or you need to reevaluate the relationship, or, maybe that person is going through something in their life that you are incapable of supporting in the way that they need. And all of these things are okay. All of these things are normal. All of these things are part of human nature and our friendships. But maybe the solve to it is as simple as moving the seats around. Maybe you keep putting your accepting villager in that seat, and that accepting villager is the one who's not judgmental, who's going to accept you for who they are. You're going to tell your deepest, darkest secrets to. Maybe you are doing that with that person, and they're kind of betraying you. You're hearing through the grapevine from other friends that they know information that you haven't told anyone about that person. And that's a betrayal. That could be a friendship ender, or it could be, I kind of know where I stand with this person now, and I can't trust them in that way. So maybe I'm going to move them over to a different seat, because that's where they'll thrive. That's where we can have a healthy relationship with the boundaries that I need. And this could all be done without having a conversation with the person, but that you're making that shift, that friendship shift. And that's a large example. There are smaller examples, certainly, of, changing those seats around. But also, I want to suggest to people, maybe you have a friend that you constantly feel like is failing you. And you sit back and wonder, well, why? Why do I feel like they're failing me? And maybe you feel like they're not understanding what you need. And I always joke, though, thinking, we really kind of have to ask for what we need in a lot of ways. And why aren't we doing that more? Because if we did, maybe we would set people up for more success in a relationship with us if we didn't expect them to be a mind reader. But also, maybe you're putting expectations on a person that has a skill set that they just can't meet it. So you have to be honest with yourself about that too. So that's a lot of different moving parts, I know, Nicole, but I wanted to give people many different examples of how small it can feel and also how big it can feel. But the common denominator here is you having to figure out, what is it that you are contributing to this? What is it that you are not doing, or that you are doing, that is creating the circumstances? Because it is a two-way street. So if you are feeling like the wrong people are in the wrong seats, then start doing that exercise of figuring out how they're fitting into those archetypes. And then also, I'm never gonna say just, me, you gotta, grabby. You need to figure out also then too, well, who am I? And am I also taking the temperature of how I'm showing up for other people? Am I failing in some way? And, you've got to do all of that in order to kind of make this circle kind of work.
Yeah, I was thinking about when you were talking, you kind of partially answered it. When you have two people, how often does this happen where somebody is choosing to be a certain way, and this other person's going, no, that's not actually what I'm looking for from you, and there's this disconnect
Right.
in that. And how do you deal with that disconnect? So you were talking, I appreciate the fact that you took it down to the personal responsibility of how are you showing up, what are you communicating to them, because maybe you haven't communicated to them that this is not what you need something
Right.
else.
Right.
So what are some practical, like if we look at a scenario, what are some practical ways that, let's say there is a disconnect where somebody is I don't know, an organizer,
Yeah.
you said, right? So there's
Mhm.
there's an organizer, and I'm just thinking about where there might be a conflict, right? Somebody's an organizer and somebody else is an acceptor,
Mhm.
and or they need the acceptor. They want the acceptor, but they're getting the organizer.
Right. Right.
How do you articulate that? How do you communicate to them in a way that is still loving and kind, and shifting that, and or what, how do you determine that maybe that's just not a friendship that's going to continue because maybe they don't want to make that change?
Well, first of all, I always say you can say what you mean without saying it mean. Hopefully, maybe, depending on the circumstances and the people. Sometimes these are hard conversations that you have to have with somebody about the deficiencies in the relationship. It's always funny. People talk about, romantic relationships and, he doesn't understand me, she doesn't understand me, all that. And it's it honestly could be translated to a platonic relationship too, because we also don't feel understood by our friends. Sometimes we sometimes feel like we're not getting what we need. And so first things first, if the relationship is important to you and that person is not showing up as that skill set, it has to start with you first, making sure you actually cast that person into the right role. Because you can't go up to someone and say, "You're not doing this for me," and they're like, "Hey, I don't know how to do that. Like I wouldn't even know where to begin." And so you can't force people to be what you need them to be. You also have to meet people where they are and not where you want them to be. And so that's the first and most important part of it. And the second part of your question, when you're looking at these roles, like the accepting villager that you just mentioned, sometimes a conversation about stretching yourself, that also can be very interesting. And I want to go back to what you said before about maybe I have the capacity for this, I just didn't know I did, or maybe I could be that. And I also think that this is an opportunity for a really interesting conversation with your friends about, going deeper with them, or asking for, what could I do that you need more of? I actually said that to my friend not too long ago. I was like, is there anything I'm not doing as your friend? I think I'm doing these things for you, but am I actually hitting the mark here? And she said to me, you know what, it would really be great if, like, I could hang out with you a little bit more. I don't see you as much, and I feel like other people, get to see you more than I do. I had no idea, Nicole, that I was making her feel that way, that I was prioritizing other people and not her. It was not personal at all. But I'm so glad she told me that she missed me, or, wished that we could spend more time together. And so it's not that I was in the wrong role in her mind. It was just that maybe I wasn't fulfilling the capacity of one of those areas as much as I could, that meant something to her, that was more valuable perhaps than me, checking in and sending text messages all the time. How are you doing? What's going on? How's your week? Instead, she really wanted more of my time with me in person, which I'm also capable of doing. So again, a larger example, a more detailed example, but just trying to show you that you can really get, really micro in these buckets, and really starting to dive deeper into what's working or what's not working in your friendships, and being able to have a successful conversation. That was not a friendship ender for me and her, but certainly there have been conversations I've had with friends where it's like, you know what, I think this is probably a good place to say, I wish you all the best and well, and thank you for the season you were in my life. But, I think we're going to, kind of go our separate ways. And that's a hard conversation to have too. But I really appreciate you saying that there's a difference between this is a relationship ender and this is something that needs some tweaking.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to talk about what happens. First of all, we've been talking about building your village. Sometimes we need to rebuild our village.
Right.
Sometimes
Yeah.
our village gets burned down,
Yeah.
as you and I were talking about before, or lost. How do you do that? How do
Yeah.
you know? Maybe as a first question is, how do you know when your village has been burned down? That's probably pretty obvious, but how do you navigate that? I mean, there's some hurt there. There's a
Yeah.
lot of stuff, and now
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
going to go rebuild. I may not be as inclined to do that.
Right. Right. The village burns down for all sorts of reasons. And a nicer way of putting that is the village is lost sometimes for all sorts of reasons, whether it's death or divorce or the falling out of a friendship, a breakup. That is sometimes the destruction of village. And I actually recently had this conversation with my dad. So my parents were married 40 years and they got divorced after 40 years. They've been divorced now about 4 years. And my dad said to me recently, you know what? After reading your book, I really realized I really don't have much of a village. And I said, well, why do you think that is, Dad? And he said, I didn't realize that all my relationships were tied up in your mom. All the friendships were kind of hers. She was friends with all the ladies and I was friends with their husbands because of those friendships. And he admitted to me, and I thought I was really happy and proud of him for saying that. He goes, I really did not harvest or nourish those relationships the way I thought I did with those gentlemen where they would have survived something like that. And so he said, I'm really, trying to figure out, how to be a better friend and how to, select the right people. And it was a really nice conversation about someone who's in their early 70s having to start all over again with friendships. And that's scary. And it's certainly very lonely. He's told me many times how lonely it is. But the only way it's going to change for him is if he really wants to change it. And I was giving him ideas about different ways to meet different people and things like that. But I think the hardest part about the village burning down is understanding that you have to be the difference in whether or not you kind of stay in that hurt, you stay in that ick, you stay in that destruction, or you really do want a chance to figure out what the new village looks like for you. And sometimes it's not the whole village that burns down. And sometimes that looks, and we're talking about death, also an important note about that. When the village surrounds you during, a traumatic event or a loss or something like that, it can be overwhelming, the amount of attention that you're getting from something like that. But then after kind of that crisis period ends, quiet sets in. And where does everybody necessarily go? And you're left figuring out, well, here's this big gaping hole I have, and how do I fill that necessarily? And maybe that's some of the people that were there when the crisis happened and they're going to fill in the gaps. Or maybe it's you having to get out there and date again after losing your spouse or losing your partner. And that feels really icky. And it feels like you just cannot go there because that's too emotional. And there's still all this hurt and all this grief and a lot of complicated feelings. So I understand exactly what you're saying about, looking at those villages that burn down for all those different reasons and understanding that the tools that you're going to take to get there may overlap with someone who lost their spouse or someone who had a breakup or someone who had a falling out in a friendship. But again, you're going to see a lot of common denominators here with it, which is you're going to have to probably take a chance, be vulnerable, be honest.
Yeah. Out of curiosity, because nowadays we have so many connections on social media, so many people we know,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of amazing people, right?
Yeah.
You probably know
Oh,
a ton of
sure.
people. I know a lot of people. Can your village get too big? And
Ooh.
yeah, and with that, it's like, how do you choose your
Yeah.
village? Do that.
Gonna get too big. It's fun because you can have multiple villagers play the same role. You can have 15 healers, and that's good, great for, wonderful if you have that, but you could have no accepting, you could have no cheerleaders. And you say to yourself, you know what? I think I'm good actually right now. I don't really need that cheerleader. I think I'm feeling fulfilled from what I do have in my little personal ecosystem here. And maybe there'll come a time that you do need that, but maybe it's not right now. And and the reason I say that is because sometimes you cap it. Sometimes you cap kind of where you are in terms of capacity, in terms of what you can take on. I always say to my friends, sometimes my dance card is full, kind of can't take on any new friendships, new things. I'm good where I am. Doesn't mean that there's not going to be a season in your life where that changes, where you feel like you could use more support. You could, spend some time trying to find that cheerleader villager or that organizer villager. So in terms of too big, you're going to have to gauge that for yourself if you're feeling like you're spread too thin with the people that you have in your life. And you're also going to have to ask yourself, if it feels too big, does it feel too big because I'm giving more than I'm receiving? Are there a lot of, not necessarily reciprocal relationships happening there? So my tank is empty. That all of those things are a really great place to start to figure out if it's a capacity issue or if it's a relationship issue with certain people. But just like kindness, I don't think you necessarily could have too big a village, not too much kindness. It just depends on how you are operating those friendships. And that's a really important question. That's one of the first questions I've ever gotten, Nicole, about whether or not a village could be too big. I really like that.
Yeah, well, I was thinking about, and thank you. I love the way you answered that, because maybe it's the giving out too much and not
Right,
getting enough back.
right.
But there's also that, like, there's a certain amount of presence you need to have with people. And like you said,
Yeah,
my friend card's full. Like, there's only so much of time,
right.
right? That kindness is limitless and all of that, but there's time, there's bandwidth. So
Right.
for me to be an acceptor, or me to be an encourager, to be able to be there enough
Mm-hmm.
of the time to actually know what's going on in their life and
Right,
support them,
right.
and also the vice versa, I think is really, really, really important. And when you were talking about villages being lost, and that can happen even in business.
Yes.
We were talking
Yeah,
about that, right?
right.
It can happen in business, and you're like, I know that happened to me. I'll turn around and I'm like, we
Where
had all these
where did they
relationships.
go?
Yeah,
Yeah.
where'd everybody
Right.
go? And I
Right.
know my parents definitely felt that way, where it was like, where did everybody go? And felt the loss of that. I never really recognized the true value and importance
Mm-hmm.
of all of that we had, because we kind of took it for granted. And then when it was gone, it was like, wow, this really
Right.
makes a difference. It's like, we just weren't used to it. You're not familiar with it. So I just want to put that out there, because there may be some people that are saying, well, does this apply to business? Does this apply in the workplace all the time?
And I actually talk about that in the book too. I had a digital content company for a great number of years, and um, I I went through a big journey, trying to figure out that business. And there were a lot of changes, moments, really low moments where I felt like I didn't know who I was, what I was doing, trusting the right people, not having the right support, making the right decisions, and that all factors into it. And after I merged my company with another company a few years ago, oh my gosh, Nicole, my identity totally changed after that. I had every day I had, kind of my to-do list. I knew who I was. I knew my contribution to the world in a certain way. And all of a sudden it totally changed, kind of seemingly overnight. And that was difficult. That was definitely very difficult for me to figure out who I was without that as part of my identity. And I know a lot of people feel that way in business. Absolutely. And feel that way just in life in general when you change roles in your life for whatever reason, like empty nesters. They were so used to just, being the parents, and all of a sudden that house is empty. And like, they're left with like them and maybe their spouse, their partner, whatever it is. And they're like, what is my life? What am I doing now? So there's so many transitions in life that I think we have to be aware of, and know that it might not feel great for a little while, but it is up to us to find that happiness, to find that through line. And there's a way to do it. There really is a way to do it. And there's a lot of different techniques to do it. And I hope that I can be helpful to people with that. But again, it goes back to what I always say. You know, people say to me, Florence Ann, what are the directions to the village? What's the phone number to call? And I'm like, okay, well, here's the book. I hope this is the book that gives the directions, fingers crossed, toes crossed, everything crossed, but I can't make you get in the car and drive there. That's what you have to do for yourself.
Yeah. Well, and that's a great opportunity to talk about your, so your book is called Build Your Village.
Yes.
And where do they find that?
florenceann.com, or you could anywhere books are sold. I hear Amazon can get it to you by the end of the day sometimes, which I think is still marvelous. I don't know how that works. And I'm on social media, Florence Ann Romano. I answer every DM. I'm here to be your virtual village.
I love that. I love that. And, you know, just as a like final thoughts on this village, when you were talking about, you know, the stages of life, and do we need a village when we're a kid and we need, you know, to be surrounded by people? Absolutely. But what I'm hearing through all the different examples, you're actually covering off all the different stages of life. There's no stage in life where we don't need a village. And so it's like we're just the kids, if you will, that have grown up and are going through our life and are needing people around us. And I know there's been people that have said, I've heard people have said that to me, I don't need people. And it's like, we actually do need people. And we also need to be there for others because we get filled up by being there, truly being there for others. So it goes both ways. I love that. So thank you. Thank you so much, Florence. And I appreciate
Nicole.
Yeah, I love what you're doing, and you identified a need. You found an area where through COVID that, you know, this was a huge gap, and there's a lot of people talking about the importance of people and humanity and so forth. But the way that you approach it, I think, is really unique and transformational, truly.
Oh gosh, Nicole, thank you. Well, this has been transformational for me just talking with you. I feel like you gave me so much to think about too. And so thank you for what you're putting into the world and your contribution.
Oh, my pleasure. And thank you. So thank you for our listeners as well. We want to also acknowledge you for being here. Thanks for tuning in. I really hope that you take what you've learned here and start to consider, what does your village look like? You know, are there some rundown buildings in your village? Or are there some gaps in you? Do you have like wide open fields? Or do you want a village? And if you don't, maybe challenge yourself as to why you don't feel like you want one. And if you have one, is to look at and saying, how can you make it better? And how can you be a better villager for others? So there's lots of questions here. This may be one of those episodes that you go back and listen to over and over again. And of course, get a copy of Florence Ann's book, Build Your Village. Also, I would suggest that if you know someone who is struggling with isolation, somebody who feels disconnected, who feels like they don't have community, feels like they just haven't found their people, their tribe, share this with them so that they can get some encouragement, some hope, and some clarity around how do they create that in their own life. And so we encourage you to do that. We'd love to hear your stories. You can go on leadersoftransformation.com, find us there. Of course, we're on social as well. And we'd love to hear how this has impacted you. And we also look forward to seeing you next time on another episode of Leaders of Transformation.